I'm a 22-year-old female, but this happened when I was 13. I'll start off with some necessary background information. When I was 13, my aunt lived in a huge apartment complex with 150 plus units within the same city as my mom and dad. I would visit her all the time just to spend some time with her. Her complex had a great park and swimming pool. I was also very close to some of the neighborhood kids that were around my age. This was during the summer of 2007. I was going to 7th grade that year, and this was the summer I stayed with my aunt to get out of my house. My aunt's apartment was on the bottom floor on the very back corner of her building. The buildings in this complex were surrounding the park and pool I frequented to create a sealed-off community with 2 exits to the main road. The buildings were 3 stories high with 6 apartments on each level, all connecting to an outside corridor which connected to the stairs. Now that's cleared up, here's what happened. It was a particularly sunny day at the complex, so I decided I was going to go outside and see if any of my friends were there so I could hang out with them, instead of wasting the day away inside. I changed into shorts and a t-shirt. I dressed way more tomboyish back then, and headed out of my aunt's apartment, made my way down the corridor and came from underneath the stairs. I began walking towards the park. I only made it about halfway when I hear a, "Hey, you!" loudly from a corridor 3 stories up. I look up and see a face, but I can't make it out. I could tell it was a male, but his voice sounded like a kid's voice, and he looked like a kid from where he was. I pointed to myself and shouted back, "Me?" He said, "Yeah, you. Can you come up here for a minute?" I stopped for a minute to think about the situation. My 13-year-old mind just chopped it up to that he was one of those neighborhood kids wanting to talk or something. So without another thought, I headed up the stairs towards where I saw him. When I finally get up there, I see a black man, around 35 to 40, sitting on the steps and waiting for me. He's dressed in a striped polo shirt, khaki shorts, and those sandals that make you think of Jesus. He seriously looks like an oversized 5-year-old. As soon as I saw him, I had a feeling of dread in my gut. I'm sure my face looked confused, and I blurted out, "What do you want?" He starts gawking about my hair and asks me why I dress the way I dress. He keeps suggesting I should go into his apartment so that he can show me around. The creepiest thing is how he looked at me when he suggested it. It was the creepiest expression I've ever seen someone make. It's hard to explain, but it led me to believe, even at 13, that he had sinister plans once inside the apartment. I quickly said that my aunt was expecting me and that I needed to get back to her apartment, or she'd come looking for me and I'd be in trouble. He tried to ask me what number apartment it was, and if he could escort me there. I was shocked at the thought of that. I hastily said, "No, I can make it there on my own, but thank you anyway." He just looked at me with a blank stare for a few seconds, like he was thinking of what he should do or say next. Then, his facial expression was now clearly disappointed, and before he could say anything else, I sprinted down the stairs and ran right back into my aunt's apartment. I didn't know if he had seen where I went. I didn't know if he had followed. All I know was that I didn't give him the chance to play out his sadistic intentions, whatever they were. I told my aunt since she had seen me lock all the locks on the door and screen door. She called the cops and I made a statement, but since he never touched me or physically harmed me, there wasn't much they could do about the situation. I made sure to never go up any more stairs unless I for sure knew the person, and to stay away from the area where his apartment was for the rest of the summer. I don't know what would have happened had I not thought on my feet and stayed up on those stairs longer than I did. When I was 25, over 10 years ago, I met a guy who grew up with some friends of mine. He seemed really cool and we started dating. After about a month, I noticed Kurt was very jealous and controlling. If I mentioned I was with a group of friends, if any of the guys were single, he accused me of sleeping with them and would ignore me for a couple of days. In retrospect, I should have gotten out of Dodge, but I was admittedly an insecure girl who was afraid to be alone back then. Another few weeks passed, and I'm a week away from getting a new apartment, which was in the same complex as his. I figure I can tough it out and break up with him when I get the place. Staying at his house was a quick walk to work. Staying at my friend's was a half-hour bike ride on a rough gravel shoulder on the side of a dark highway. Turned out he ended up breaking up with me. No big deal. But this is where it gets ugly. He would continuously message me on MSN with passive-aggressive insults. He was the king of jabs that, to an outsider, might not seem so bad. I tried blocking him and changing my email, but he would realize he was blocked and start contacting friends. He even contacted a really obscure friend I had never talked about, leading me to believe he might have hacked my email. He would show up at my patio doors and walk right in if it wasn't locked. He'd come in and just grab things and say he was borrowing them. He'd bring it back and things stayed peaceful, I guess. One day he came in and I was in my room folding laundry. He proceeded to flirt and joke, and it was actually funny, so I laughed. He took that as an invite, and sparing the details, didn't stop until I was in tears. That was the day I started double-checking the patio doors, and sacrificed a nice breeze on warm days. At the time, because I knew him and was laughing with him, I thought I was to blame, so I never told anyone. A couple of weeks later, I was at his brother's place in his building, a small town. He called me asking where I was. I asked if he was at my door. I looked outside, and sure enough, he was there. I told him I was at his brother's. I had known his brother for years before I even knew he existed. His brother never mentioned him, and now I know why. Kurt started accusing me of sleeping with his brother. I went downstairs to calm him, feeling safe since his brother was in the building and knew where I was. He yelled at me and kicked me in the stomach. I went back and told his brother, who was going to go confront him, but I told him not to. With that, I went to the police and made a report. I also had the police come facilitate getting possessions back that he refused to return. That was a separate call. I didn't get my things that day. Kurt told the cops they were gifts to him. He later returned them on his own time because control, I guess. Things quieted down a bit after that. I eventually got a new boyfriend in the States. I was living close to the Detroit border. My boyfriend contacted me and said that Kurt had tried to add him on MySpace. I looked at the existing page and he had changed it so it was all pictures of me with slanderous comments. He did that just so my boyfriend would see it. Luckily, he knew all about him already. If you're wondering why I didn't go to the police again, here's why. I would text him often, telling him off and threatening to go to police. He would then threaten to charge me with harassment due to the texts. My career relies on a clear criminal check, and I was afraid to risk it. Also, when I reported the assault, the small-town officer claimed he could use force to remove me from his apartment, even after I said I never entered but was in the hallway. I didn't trust the police after that. He would watch my apartment and ask whose car was in my spot, telling me that he felt betrayed. He would message me, telling me that he made me dinner and to come over. To be honest, I was afraid not to. I'd go, eat, and then leave. It seemed to make him feel like he was in control, and I felt it was better than any potential lashing out if I didn't go. I eventually moved to another town, but the passive-aggressive abuse continued. Kurt had moved to another province where my niece lived, and started using my niece to get at me. They conspired to tell me he sexually assaulted her. I stopped speaking to her as well after that. I mean, who does that? I eventually moved across the country, and even then, a year later, he contacted someone I met up with out there that was also from our hometown. Only when this guy told him he knew all about him, and if he messed with me, he was messing with him, did it all finally stop. Then 10 years later, last October, I moved back home. I didn't change my location on my Facebook because even years later, I didn't want him easily finding out where I was. I also posted that if anyone asked about me, not to share my information. I got a notification on a dating website that Kurt wanted to meet me. I know this was his way of letting me know that he's back too and still around. I hadn't even thought of the possibility of him seeing me on there. I was afraid to go out at night, and when I did, I was always looking over my shoulder. A week passed with no further contact, but a few weeks later I saw him at a festival. We made eye contact, and I hated that he may have seen my initial expression of shock, so I composed myself and said hello. He simply smirked. I felt like I had looked into the eyes of the devil. I left, watching to make sure he didn't follow me, and make sure that he didn't see what car I got into. I knew that he had seriously abused women since, but had gotten off every time because he hires the best lawyers. My only comfort is that I don't think he revisits the past too much, because those women know what he is. His charm won't fool us a second time. I had been contacted about one of the most recent women, and was wanting to contribute to the case after speaking to her, so I called the police asking for a copy of my report. The cop who said he was allowed to kick me never even filed it, so if anyone has any other ideas as to how I can prove this to the mods, I'm all ears. Also, my moves were never about him, just making the point that distance never stopped him. I hope to never see him again, but I hope the law does. His last girlfriend has a permanent brain injury, and the next one will probably not be so lucky. He gets more confident every time he gets away with it. This story is technically my mom's, but it still somewhat affected my siblings and me as well. My mom grew up in South Florida, and this started during the early 70s. She was a senior in high school, and she met a guy at a wedding. He was the drummer in the wedding band, a few years older than her, and therefore he was the cool, mysterious guy that many girls her age dreamed of. They immediately hit it off, and he commented on her saddle shoes she was wearing at the time. She gave him her home phone number, and I believe they maybe went on 1 or 2 dates, and everything seemed totally fine. He would regularly call the house, and she would sit in the kitchen floor and talk to him. One night, their phone conversation took a weird turn. He started asking her things like, "Have you ever thought about killing yourself?" And, "Do you ever think about murdering people?" Obviously, she was shocked at this and got very uncomfortable, and completely stopped talking to him. This is the last she heard from him, or so she thought. It was 2012, and I had just graduated from college. I was hanging out in my college town to finish out my lease and work and figure out my next move. My mom calls me and says something weird has been going on. She tells me she's received a letter from this man she knew in high school. I had no idea about this guy, as she'd never mentioned him at all to me, my siblings, or my dad. She explained to me who this man is and how she knew him, but hadn't spoken to him since that one uncomfortable phone call. The letter said something along the lines of, "I see you're really happy and married with kids, etc." But he goes on to mention each of us by name. He also mentions my dad's name and where he works. My parents met in college, in another state. They quickly married, graduated college, and moved to yet another state, and then another state once my 2 sisters were born. She had no idea how he knew her new married name and address. She's never been on social media, and when she had all of us kids, had stopped working. If you were to Google her name, you wouldn't even find a thing. Then she recalls getting a phone call from the alumni association at her college, telling her that a man had been calling on and off for months, trying to get her contact information, but they weren't allowed to give out that sort of thing. She then tells me his name, and I remember having a Facebook friend request and a Twitter follow request from this man. My siblings all had them as well. My mom, having no social media like I mentioned, asked me to see if I could dig around his social media accounts and see what I could find. I find a music MySpace and a Reverb Nation page of some really terrible music he had recorded and uploaded. One of the songs was called Victoria, which is her name. All of the other songs had seemingly normal titles like Summer's Day. I tell my mom this, and she freaks out. I send her the link, and it's hard to make out the lyrics because the quality is so bad. But he mentions her saddle shoes, her beauty. They literally hung out twice, 40 years ago, and these were all songs that had been recorded pretty recently. I dug a little deeper and found out that he was making a website dedicated to freeing Amanda Knox, a woman accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. This is super alarming at the time, but I've since not put too much weight on that since her innocence is actually very possible. But it's still very strange. My dad didn't seem fazed by any of this, but my mom was freaked out and wouldn't stay home alone since this man knew their address. She ends up telling all this to a family friend who's a private investigator, and he decides to do some digging on this guy. First of all, he's changed his last name. Secondly, he's moved to about 5 different states in the last 20 years, under different aliases and working completely different jobs. There wasn't much that could be done since he never actually threatened my mom, and somehow didn't have a record. He still sometimes pops up with friend requests to my siblings and me, but other than that, no one knows what his deal is. The fact that he's moved around quite a lot and changed his name is definitely a red flag. I personally think the dude is a serial killer, and if he's not, then he's just a sad, lonely, mentally unstable man, and I hope he gets the help he needs. This happened 2 nights ago, so I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work hours before me, so he goes to bed before I do. I usually get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and TV in the living room and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny and old and poses zero threat to anyone. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck is a few steps down and a small path to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out of the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds and flip on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do every night, kind of like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's going to be the one time that there actually is someone hiding there, you know? Hey, I watch a ton of horror movies, and it's pitch black outside at night where I live. So a few nights ago, I got ready for bed, went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and peeked out the window. I flipped on the light. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s, standing off to the side of the door, facing it. I see him raise his arm up and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light was on, preparing for someone to open the door. I screamed, as loud as I could, which startled the guy, and he jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was right next to the stairs, and ran. My husband ran out of our bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove around trying to find the guy, but no luck. The guy had broken the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always kept locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking out first, I might be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in, or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was fucking terrifying. My parents are buying us an outdoor security camera this week as an early birthday present for Rob. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to send in, or if you'd just like to message me sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media accounts, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter account. Go ahead and check any of those out and send me a message, and I'll try to include your story in a video or get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline the name of the story and any possible themes it might have, as well as how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in today's video, you can go ahead and check down there in the description. The music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also name the tracks, and provide links to the artists if you feel like checking out more of their work. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.